Well, good afternoon to the UK column listeners. I'm very, very pleased to be here with another gutsy woman, Sandy Adams. And after a little bit of time of not speaking to each other, we had a telephone conversation. And I thought she would be an ideal candidate for one of these little informal chats, really, about what makes somebody stand up to be counted and become an activist and do things that very often require some real courage, guts, really, in order to challenge and take on the system. So, Sandy, I'm going to say a really big thank you for agreeing to give up a bit of your time and speak to me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Brian. It's a pleasure to speak. Thank you.
Well, where should we start? The key bit is that in these chats, what I'd like to do is find out a little bit about you so that we give people a little picture of who you are. Obviously, just as far as you feel comfortable with. But of course, I met you when you were already pretty active. You'd done a lot of research on Agenda 2030 and you were starting to speak out on it and give talks. So I think I've always known you as being a pretty gutsy, outspoken person. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you went from being, I'm going to use that terrible word and say normal. You went from being normal to being a gutsy woman and being active. How did that happen?
Well, to be honest, I don't think I've ever really been normal. Um, I think I tried to conform a bit, but I've never I realise now that I've always had that fire within me to challenge and question. And to a degree, I've always done that. I remember Yeah, I remember being in the theatre and there was a strike at the National Theatre, um, and uh, and standing on the picket line, and we all got arrested and stuff like that. Because there's always been things that I thought were not right, and that they were going to sack a whole load of stagehands that had been working in the theatre for donkey's years, and had families to support. And because everything was automated, that we moved into the National Theatre from the Old Vic, and everything was automated, so they got rid of all these people, and I thought this isn't right. And but anyway, it all ended in the High Courts with Lord Denning ruling that police could break up picket lines and that you could get sacked for withdrawing your labour. And I was horrified and I felt a great injustice, and I went to work in a zoo after that because I was so fed up with human beings. So that was me when I was probably about 20, 19, 20. Yeah, yeah.
So, Sandy, was it theatre? Did you aim for a theatre career when you were at school?
Well, yeah, that was another thing. When I was at school, all the girls did, you either sort of left and married a rich man, which I didn't want to do, or you learnt shorthand and typing, or you did a degree. And I was very good at art, so I ended up going to art school just to get away from home, really. And I went to London to art school, and I studied theatre design because I loved theatre and I loved design. So I sort of amalgamated the two, and I became I trained as a set designer, and that's what I worked in for many years. I worked at the Old Vic and the National Theatre and various other rep theatres and all sorts of things. And I worked in at the English National Opera, doing backdrops, and well, the Old Vic I did backdrops, and English National Opera I did prop making and backdrops and stuff. So it was a lovely way of life. I enjoyed it, but it was very badly paid in those days. And I think as soon as I got to the point where I wanted to, I got married and had children, and we had a mortgage to pay. My husband at the time was working in what they then called industrial theatre, and it was corporate. It was corporate live events and corporate installations. They called it corporate live events. So I kind of migrated into that world, which I found deeply unsatisfactory. So yes, because I started working for the big money people, and I just I wasn't happy doing that. You know, it was, for me, it was working with I just saw a different side to the world, I think, because it was in that time in the sort of 80s and 90s where the whole corporate thing was becoming huge, and particularly with the events industry. And you know, working with clients like GlaxoSmithKline, and I didn't realize they were bad at first. You know, GlaxoSmithKline and Google and Microsoft, and another one called Gartner's that I was working with. They're into really selling data. So it just was an eye opener. You know, I met certain people that I suddenly thought, no, I don't like this world.
That is quite a big, and it's an interesting change. I mean, in my lifetime, I've met a few people involved with the theatre, and the thing that I always picked up from them is that they clearly did it because they loved the job. I think the pay's probably
Mm,
always been poor, but you say to them, you know, why do you do it? You work these terrible hours, and they say because we love doing it, and when we're in a production that goes well, and you see people enjoying what we're doing, that's a huge buzz for us. We get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So to go from those sort of people to what do we describe them as, suited big
yeah.
corporate people, that's a huge change, isn't it?
It was a big change, and you know, suddenly having meetings in boardrooms full of suits, and these people think very differently. You know, I remember having a conversation with some people from GlaxoSmithKline, and I actually walked out of the meeting because they were talking about penetrating the Ayurvedic market. I mean, horrible language like that. You know, penetrating the the Ayurvedic medicine market in India. That means sort of like replacing it with pharmaceuticals, and that really made my blood boil. I couldn't bear it.
That is quite a incredible one, isn't it? But I also have to say the same, that in my the early half of my life and my time in the military, I did my job and believed a lot of things because of what I read and saw in the media around me. Um, but it was only later when you really start to look at maybe some of the things that the military was doing then, and then you look at the big corporations, you start to think, this is not right, or you get the sense that it's not nice.
Absolutely, you do. You just get. It's almost like I don't know what it is. It's like an inner compass. You know, and I found that my inner compass has become more astute. You know, as I've got older, you know, I can tell a mile if somebody isn't trustworthy, or it's a very handy tool actually. To
It's a
have.
very important one as well,
Yeah,
isn't it? Because
yeah.
you sense that, particularly, well, we could see it particularly strongly during COVID pandemic and the lockdown, but
Mm,
the government telling us in their little three word messages that we had to trust the government to keep us safe, when in fact for every adult in this country, the first person they should trust to keep them safe is themselves, and they should be using their own intuition.
yes, indeed. You know, this is it. We've kind of, we don't listen to our inner voice sometimes, and learning how to trust that is quite challenging. But once you start doing it, you realize that it's there for a reason. It's to guide you to do the right action or the right
Yeah.
decisions. Yeah.
And I'm going to have to bring this up because the first time I heard you say it, I was fascinated. And I know there will still be many people that won't have heard you talking about this. But at one point in your sort of corporate life, you met the famous Bill Gates.
I did. I did. It was a long time ago. It was in the early to mid. I can't even remember now. It's all a blur. But it was in the early 2000s. I was working for a company in Chelsea Harbour, and we what the producer that I was working with won this account with Microsoft, and it was to create. First of all, it was to create something called Microsoft Home, and we took over a big house in Notting Hill that belonged to a billionaire. It was one of those beautiful houses that looked like a doll's house, square, sort of Georgian or Regencies or whatever. It was very beautiful. It looked like a doll's house, and turn it into we took all the furniture out, put it into storage, transform this house into a connected house. It had to all be, everything had to be intelligently connected, and to the point where it had an intelligent sort of interwiring that made everything speak to each other. It's a bit like the Internet of Things, but in a house. And this was the beginnings of what I think it was almost like trialing on a small scale what was intended for the world. So they were in there sort of making everything talk, intelligent fridges, intelligent heating systems. You could even turn the bath on your way home so that you had a nice hot bath. You could turn the cooker on. You could, everything was so all singing, all dancing. And it was a great success. And obviously the Gates Foundation, or Microsoft rather, I don't know whether the Gates Foundation were working then. I suppose they were, I don't know, but Microsoft were very happy with it, and so they gave them another contract, which was to do this it was called Microsoft Life, Life Squared. It was Microsoft Life Squared, it was called. And I was asked to do all the interior design, all the exterior and interior design for this installation. And so it required finding a venue that would create a London square. And we took over a school in Chelsea. It had actually been a school. Then I think Chelsea Art School had taken it over. And then they'd moved into a new building. So it was empty. And it had a big playground in the middle. And I had to transform that into a London square, put railings in and treat, lamp posts and grass. I had hydroponic grass that grew on carpet and all sorts of strange things. So I didn't have to excavate the actual tarmac, but we did excavate and put trees in. And all the buildings around became, there was a cafe, a house, a business, and obviously a place for all the delegates to go, and all the geeks, all the Microsoft, people that were going to buy this software were going to go and sort of try it out in this big space. And I to be honest, I didn't really understand. All the geeks would come in once I'd designed everything and everything was decorated and carpeted and looking beautiful. All the geeks would come in halfway through and put all the sort of wiring in, and then I'd have to sort of gloss over it afterwards. So it was an interesting time, but I didn't at that time I wasn't fully aware of the implications of all this, apart from the fact that it seemed like this is what our future would be. And they had an intelligent car in the square, and it had GPS. And of course, in those days we hadn't got GPS. To me, it was like, this sort of extraordinary technology. So I just sort of carried on with that. And then Bill Gates was flown in to look at it. They were so impressed with it. He came over and he was very happy with it. And he got interviewed by Trevor McDonald on the sofa in the house that I created. We all had to meet him and shake hands and say hi. But I didn't really get a very nice feeling when I met him at all. I just thought what a funny, strange man he was. He was very aloof, very strange. Yeah, I just didn't get a good feeling. And I realized that at that time I was beginning to question everything. And I realized that there was something a bit odd about this whole environment that we created. It was all too reliant on technology. And I kept thinking, well, what if it all goes wrong? What if the world was like this and it all went wrong? And I think at the time I was beginning to look at the whole climate change thing, and I was beginning to just really question the narrative of everything, which I've always done. And yeah, I just thought this is this is all a bit peculiar. And I think as time went on, I was working for other big corporates. I worked for Google, and I met Eric Schmidt and Gerard Cohen at the time. And I was just amazed. I mean, I was doing this summit in, I think it was Ireland. Yeah, it was Dublin. It was in Dublin. And it was an acronym. It was the Summit Against Violent Extremism. It was called SAVE. And I could not get my head around this summit because I thought this is very peculiar, because they'd invited all these ex-terrorists to explain how they had organized themselves on the internet. And to me, this was very bizarre because, you know, they'd got people from the IRA and from Islamic terrorist organizations who had apparently reformed. And it was clear to me, I don't know, it's only sort of clear to me a while afterwards, because I was asking some of my colleagues, don't you think this is a very weird thing that Google are doing? Why have they got all these ex-terrorists talking about the way they organize themselves on the internet? And I realized afterwards, I mean, as I went into doing all my research, that it was really how do domestic terrorists organize themselves over the internet? And it was their way of working out a censorship program. And that kind of made me feel a bit strange. And I met Eric Schmidt in the bar, and he talked about how he flew into New York every week to meet what's his name, George Bush. And I thought, why would you do that? You know, because I really understood what 9/11 was about, because I think 9/11 was my biggest wake-up call, as it was for most people.
Are you able to give us even a rough date when did the save?
The save, now do you know, I've still got a notebook with it on. It's probably about 2010, maybe. I'm just trying to remember. Maybe I can find it on here.
While you're sort of thinking about that, I'll just say if it is about that period, we had a lot of stuff coming in around about that period, maybe a bit later, because we had all of the prevent strategy, for example. So all of a sudden, the British government was talking a lot about terrorism and counter-terrorism and programs in order to make sure that young people weren't going to be drawn into terrorism. That's what comes into my mind. So
I'm just doing a quick Google search, because all of that period, because I was going also through a very bad marriage breakup, I sort of, you know how you block it out, but let me just find it. It's SAVE summit. I'm just putting it in.
no, it's fine. I mean, what a service this is for our audience, that we're doing live research in order to give them the best information possible. I think it's brilliant.
Right, here we go. Let's try it. Let's say Summit Against Violent Extremism, held in Dublin, summer of 2011. There you are.
Yeah, so you were more or less spot on with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this absolutely, you know, for me, this just figures that we had all of this amazing counter-terrorism stuff all piling in, and what was it really doing? I think it was making people fearful. And should we just admit to our audience that are with us that we were chatting a little bit before we got started on the recorded part of this chat, and we very quickly were talking about the fact we are feeling the government wants to make us feel frightened all the time.
Yes, I mean, I think this is it. It's about us not being so scared that we can't see our own strength, and we can't see our own power in standing up to all of this. Because if you've got a bully, and they are bullies, you know, these you know, the WEF and the UN and all our governments that are going along with this are bullies. They bullied people into taking something that will be very bad for their health. You know, the bullying thing is really about disempowering people, and I think that's what we're living with at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And there's a lot to talk about just going down that avenue. While you were doing your little bit of research there, I just called up part of the UK column news that I did on Monday, because I'd specifically drawn people's attention back to dear old David Cameron. Sorry, I'll qualify that, Cameron, um, uh, talking about hard military force being needed in Syria, but also
Oh,
talking about the danger of ISIL. They were the Islamic terrorists, and then he went on to warn of a terrible ISIL attack on Britain. And then we had Prevent, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, um, which was departmental advice for schools and childcare providers. But essentially, you're targeting children with very heavy concepts. So to identify the children who could be potential terrorists, what you're actually doing is frightening the pants off all the rest of the children. And then we had Channel, protecting vulnerable people from being drawn into terrorism. And ultimately, the one that I've always been deeply unhappy about is MAPA, the multi-agency
mm,
public protection arrangements, whereby I think there's 63 MAPA cells across the country, and they take just anecdotal um, information on people who
mm.
may be suspected of committing a crime. The police are involved, local authorities, mental health, NHS, and they're essentially spying on the public.
Yes, it's like pre-crime. You're guilty before proven.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, so Sandy, I'll tease you a bit here because you started off saying, well, you got involved in some of the protests that the theatre people were involved in. So
Yeah.
that was that. You started to maybe smell a rat with your um, involvement in the big corporate world. And my goodness, fascinating to hear about you meeting Bill Gates and others. So this starts you off thinking that something isn't right. And you just
Hmm.
said to us that it was the sort of, I think you said the Agenda 2030 and the environmental agenda, which
Yeah.
started to get you thinking.
I think I read James Delingpole's Watermelons. I think it was around the same time that I was doing that Save summit thing, and I began to see the link between um, environmentalism and the United Nations sort of pushing this whole narrative of environmentalism. And then I read Rosa Kore's book Behind the Green Mask, and she specifically speaks about, I mean, I think James did talk about Agenda 21 because it was Agenda 21 there, it wasn't 2030, because that's just a goal and that happened in 2015. But I think it was Rosa Kore's book. After reading Watermelons, I read Rosa Kore's book. I think hers was published around the same time, probably 2011. And I sort of really did a deep dive into Agenda 21, and realized that it was accelerating very fast in America, and that they were beginning to push back, sort of just post, Rosa publishing Behind the Green Mask. And I just suddenly started looking at Agenda 21 because she said it's in every town council in America. And then I started doing research and realizing that actually it's in every town council in England as well, under ICLEI. ICLEI is the International Committee for Environmental and Local Initiatives. So it was really the kind of common purpose that came into all of our town councils around that time, around sort of 2011, 2012. So they were pushing environmentalism as the reason for control then. And that had all come out of the Earth Summit, obviously, in 1992. But by sort of, mid to late 2000s, it was really being pushed in each town council to adopt these green policies that where our money would go to. Yeah.
So you discover these things, Sandy. What would you say, or can you think of something that you might say to us was the first time you decided to actually as a result of all your research and your understanding, you decided to stand up and do something?
Well, I think it was I'd left the corporate world. I'd gone through a divorce, and my children were at university, and I'd taken up a sort of community pub that was going to be closed in Glastonbury, and I had a venue room there, and I can't remember when. I think when was it that you came to Glastonbury? Was it 2014? I can't remember. And we did a big thing in the town hall with John Hurst um and I think it was the Article 61 guy, David Robinson, and Lance was there. Do you know?
I've done a couple of probably I've done three, two or three
Yeah,
events that I've done in
Glastonbury.
Glastonbury. So I just say one I do remember that at the end of it, some of us went back to a pub and there was a lovely little beer garden off to one side, and we went out there, and a man started playing the flute.
Oh,
And it's interesting, isn't it, how you how your mind
that
works?
could have been,
But
could have been
it was
lovely.
summertime, so it was very warm, but
Hmm.
evening time, and we were just de-stressing after the event, and we sat out in this little beer garden, and then this man started playing the flute, and it was just absolutely beautiful.
Oh, that could have been it, because it was quite a musicy pub. But I do remember that event, because I think you brought Melanie with
Oh
you.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. So but I what had happened is I'd started to I'd met Lance, who was a friend of yours for many years. Do you remember Lance? And
indeed,
he
yeah.
was an absolute brain, and I was fomenting all my ideas about. I'd read Behind the Green Mask. I'd read Agenda 21. I'd read, sort of James Delingpole's Watermelons, and I suddenly thought, I met Lance, and he said I decided off my own bat to do a talk at the Glastonbury Positive Living Group, and I can't even remember what year it was. And there was a sign outside the town hall saying, Sandy Adams speaking about Agenda 21. Nobody knew what it was, obviously. Um, and Lance came in and said, I've never heard anyone speak about Agenda 21, and I know all about it. And he was an absolute brain, Lance Turnbull. And sadly, he took his own life, probably, I don't know, before lockdown, just before lockdown. Um, because, he got himself into, as a lot of people do who are in our movement, got himself into a bit of a hole, thinking that there was no way out of it all. And he always used to say, Blondie, it's up to you. And I always hear his voice now. Whenever I go and do something, it's Blondie, it's up to you, he used to say. But I just feel that he had an amazing brain and knew all about just about every aspect of Agenda 21. He'd even done a timeline from 1875 that he gave me, and I've still got it, a timeline of Agenda 21, going right from the biosphere and the noosphere projects in the 1800s, and the whole sort of Gaia principle. And it was just fascinating. He was a wonderful man. And I also met David Robinson, who was talking about Article 61 and how that can be used very successfully. And I have to say, we did use it very successfully. And it's a tool that at the moment not many people are looking at, but I haven't got time to sort of follow that route at the moment. I hope somebody takes it up. But yeah, it was there, and I did this talk at the Positive Living Group, and then I think I then went and did another talk at Sunrise Festival. No, it wasn't Sunrise. It was the Green Gathering or something. It was years ago.
Or was
And
it the Secret Garden,
it
maybe?
wasn't the Secret Garden. It was somewhere. I think it was Sunrise. I think it was Sunrise Festival. It was in Wales. Um, and my friend was running the speakers tent, Sean Kerwin. He was Avalon Rising. He ran the speakers tent, and he said, would you come and talk about this Agenda 21 you keep talking about? So I said, yeah, okay. And I didn't realise, but Piers Corbyn and Mark Windows were speaking there as well. And I listened, they listened to what I was saying, and they said, your talk fits very well in with ours, because I think Mark was doing communitarianism and Piers was doing obviously weather. And the three all kind of, it was almost like they dovetailed together. And they said, would you come on a tour with us of England doing, weekends? And I said, well, I'm running a pub, but weekends I've got staff, obviously. And yes, I can do that. And it was very peculiar because we did go off on tour in this camper van with Piers on the top shelf snoring and Mark down one end and me down the other. And it was very funny, it was, it was a very bizarre thing to do, but go all around the country talking about these issues. And it was almost like we were planting little seeds of what was to come. And we finished that sort of all of that part of the wake up process literally just before COVID, and it came to a sort of natural end because I was we were all fed up with each other, to be honest. Because you do that for long enough and you just think, oh, I don't want to do another weekend doing that. And as much as I admire what Piers does, sometimes working with people, you've got personalities, and Piers would never be anywhere on time, and he was a lovely bloke. I love him to bits and still do. But and Mark, sometimes went over, and you didn't get time to do your bit, so it all kind of came to a natural end, which was great. And then COVID kicked in, and that was really when I think I knew immediately what it was, and I knew that it was acceleration of Agenda 20, what was by then the 17 goals of Agenda 2030, because the climate change hadn't worked. The whole climate change thing, wasn't strong enough to get everybody captured, and of course, that Guterres and Klaus Schwab had signed the Strategic Framework Partnership document in Geneva in 2019 in June, and then in 2019 again in November they'd got together, in the Johns Hopkins facility in New York to present the tabletop exercise Event 201, where they had this whole scenario about what if scenario about what if a novel coronavirus escaped from a wet market in Brazil. It was Brazil in this tabletop exercise. And of course, Bill Gates is there as well. He's been invited this time with Melinda. And they're saying, well, yes, we've got a vaccine. We can deal with it. And literally, that was November 2019. And the rest is history, really. Because whilst we were asleep, this whole lockdown really was to keep us asleep and locked up while they put the infrastructure in. All the infrastructure went in for the biometrics in supermarkets, for the 5G towers, the LED lamp posts, the upgrade of everything to facilitate, this huge technocratic takeover of our world. And this was global, see. So while the globe was asleep, the infrastructure went in.
I think that's a very powerful assessment. I also watched as stuff unfolded during lockdown. We can just come back onto that in a minute. I just wanted to jump back a little bit before we talk about all those other issues. But when you were delivering talks to audiences, when you're traveling to different venues to give these talks, which I know is very hard work, what sort of response did you get from the audience? How did people treat you?
Well, it was funny, we went all over the place. We went to we went all around different places in England. We did Wales, we did Fairborn, and Fairborn was interesting because it's a little town in Wales, in North Wales, which is under what they call managed retreat, where they're saying because of sea level rise, the whole town has to be evacuated by 2025. So and this is a little town near Barmouth, sort of on that sort of coast in Wales, and it mainly it's 60s bungalows. It was almost like it was a development in the 60s, and a lot of people have gone there to retire. And they were being told, right, 2025, you're out of here because there's sea level rise, it's going to disappear. And it just happens to nestle in the sort of the national park area, where they actually do want a wetland, some sort of wetland thing going on. And we were there to just say, look, there is no sea level rise. We got Niels Axel Morner, apparently had been down there a few years before with Mark, and has said there's 0 sea level rise. So we went there to really present Agenda 21, and there was a lot, I would say 50-50. Half the audience were absolutely with us, and half of them were saying, you're barking mad, particularly because the local newspaper had put leaflets through everyone's door saying we were conspiracy theorists, and that we mustn't be listened to. And there was even people with placards outside saying, don't listen to these people, they're mad, So we had fun, a strange response, really. We had a very good response in Hayling Island. A lot of people were very awake there. Brighton, we got banned. We got banned from Brighton several times because it's so woke, which is interesting because one of my great uncle was a major activist in Brighton in the 1930s. So it's quite interesting how things go full circle. I only found out about him a few years ago because it was all a big secret in my family. But anyway, Brighton was all a bit woke. It was they didn't want us, so we ended up doing having to go undercover in Hove in a pub. So it was quite funny. And sometimes we'd go to church halls and there'd be 4 people with a dog on a string, but it didn't matter. It was almost like it's like being an apostle. You're sort of evangelizing and hoping that something comes of it. It doesn't matter how small the audience was.
This is an extremely good point because we're touching on, well, we're talking really about being active and what happens, and it's hard work. But I remember going to give a talk right the way along the south coast. I had to drive 4.5 hours to get there. So Littlehampton or somewhere in that area. And the man who'd booked it said, oh, there's going to be at least 60 people. So I drive 4.5 hours from Plymouth to get to this place, and I'm there in good time. But when people turn up, there was only about 10 of them.
Mm.
And I can't say I was very disappointed because I've sort of seen this sort of thing happen before, but I thought, I've come a long way. But then it turned out that in that very small audience, there were 5 local councillors.
Oh.
And I was amazed at that. But this was because the gentleman had got a bit of influence with his local council. And so the audience was very small, but those people were very interesting. And what I really liked is they asked me a lot of questions, which meant, one, they were paying attention, and 2, they seemed to be interested in, getting a response, and I could come back and answer the questions. So when ultimately I was setting off in my car to do the 4.5 hours back to Plymouth, I was actually thinking, I wonder whether I've sown more seeds. I'm echoing your comment there. I wonder whether I've sown more seeds there than I have in some of the bigger meetings that I've been to. So I never really judged the power of the meeting on the number of people there, although it is always nice when you can speak to a big audience.
Yes, I mean, I do think that the seeds that you sow at these, what you think is pointless meetings, I mean, so many times we turned up at different village halls, and there was only a few people there, and then you find that actually they were the ones that started the stand in the parks. They listened and they thought, oh my God, this resonates, with that talk that we saw all those years. It wasn't that many years, maybe 2 years ago or whatever. And those people, I still get you know, messages from people saying, I remember seeing you when you were speaking to 7 of us in the Working Men's Club in Dorking or something. And you think, okay, I don't remember that one, but I must have done it. But yeah, it's quite nice really when you know that those seeds, and it's not it's not futile. Everything means something. No matter how small the action is, it means something.
Yeah, this is good because it's encouragement for people who say, "Oh, well, it's pointless. We can't do anything,"
Oh, we
and
can. Yeah.
we absolutely can.
Yeah.
And what we need is many hands making light work, many people doing a little bit
Mm,
instead of a small number of people doing a lot. But yes, everything you do, every time you stand up and to be counted, or you stand up and you speak out, it does have an effect. This is something that I've learned, I got to say,
mm.
the last 20 years. But it can be tough. Did you did you ever think that it was too much for you, that you were doing this and you'd done all these trips and you've given a lot of talks? Did you ever feel, I'm not sure I can carry on with this?
Um, no, I mean not until funny enough, not until recently. Isn't that funny? What then I was almost like on a mission. I was thinking, no, this is something that has to be called out. This is really you know, really important. And there was a time when I emailed Rosa Corrie, not thinking I'd ever get a reply, and she did reply. And I was doing quite a bit in Totnes at that time, and we'd organised a meeting there at the Seven Stars. And I'd said, look, wouldn't it be great if we got Rosa on a video link? And she had said she would do it. And then at the last minute, she'd said, look, I can't because I'm moving house or something. And she said, oh, Sandy, you do it. You can do it far better, you know, because you're in England. It'll be, you know, easier for you. And she said, you know stuff anyway. And it was then that I thought, gosh, she's almost like saying, get on with it in England. So that's when I really decided I've got to really, because nobody else was talking about it. If there was, maybe I wouldn't have done it. You know, it's funny, isn't it? How you just think, right, no one's doing this. And I felt compelled to talk about it. And now everyone's talking about it. So I'm feeling, oh, perhaps I don't have to do so much now, but I am. I haven't stopped. But I don't like at the moment, because I'm trying to write a book. I don't want to rush about the country anymore. I feel I've done that. You know, I've done that for years.
Yeah, this is a very important point, and I can understand exactly what you're talking about because I I certainly did. I'm going to say close to 400 public talks
Mm,
um, over my time. Some of those bigger organized events, some of them in tiny village halls with 10 people or 17 people, those sorts of numbers. And I know that I had a little Peugeot diesel car, which didn't actually have a lot of miles on it. And then suddenly I realized that I'd put these thousands and thousands of miles on that little car, traveling all around the place to give talks. And I can also look at the map of UK, and I've been there, I've been there, I've been
mm,
there. And that's all because I traveled giving talks. But of course, the power of the internet and the power of modern phones make a huge difference, plus the social media channels. So whilst there are people who say, oh, we shouldn't be using these things because they're the tools of the other side, I think no, we're
oh,
fighting a
definitely.
battle against these horrible people,
Mm,
and we have to use everything in our, everything that we have in order to fight back. And if that means we have to use the internet or we have to use Telegram to communicate, then we absolutely should do that.
mm, absolutely. No, I agree. And it's funny how Zoom really became something in lockdown. And now everyone's using it. And actually, it does save the mileage, I have to say. If I can do a Zoom, I know it's not the same as being there in person. And I have got a few talks that I will do in person. Um, but very few now in the diary, because I really want to just really get on with the study and doing the book, because I feel that, I don't know, I'm just feeling compelled to do that right now, because I feel I need to leave some sort of legacy at some point. Not that I'm going anywhere, but do you know what I mean? You want to, and I feel it's needed as well from the spiritual perspective as well. It will have a spiritual slant, the book.
That's a very important aspect, that there is a spiritual side to this. I believe it's a spiritual battle without
Oh, yes.
any question at all.
Yeah.
And and we need to recognize this, because if you're fighting a spiritual battle, you need to know how to do that.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, interesting. You should come in on that angle.
Yeah, I mean, we've got all this technology that's it attempts to alter the very fabric of our society with alarming rapidity, really. This march of AI transforming our world into a sort of, hybrid cyber physical sort of planet. And we didn't ask for this, we didn't want it. But the worst thing is that, what with I suppose it's, the rollout of fifth generation wireless and all this, it's that's central to what they're trying to do. And we all know it's beyond the constraint of any spiritual or moral consideration. It's just happening, and they're not thinking of the human being or the human condition. And I just feel we need a reaffirmation of human, sort of values, and a recovery of the sacred view of nature, and work towards a truly human future. Because if we allow this march of totalitarian and totalitarianism and AI to sort of take over our planet, then the human condition and what makes us human is that we have a soul, and there's no soul in any of that. There's no soul.
No, there isn't. And I'm smiling. You're talking about something very serious, but I was smiling. While I'm smiling is because as you're talking about this, into my head came a recent interaction I had with it's the AI system actually, with Amazon, because I'd ordered a product and then I'm being told it's not being delivered to me, but there was no explanation why. And when sufficient time had gone past, I tried to find out why. And then I'm talking to bots. I'm not talking to an online call center where you can text them and a human being is reply. I'm clearly being answered by a bot. And I don't know whether it's just me, but I feel the coldness coming through the screen of the computer. I know that I am communicating with something that is inherently dark and wrong, because it's something, the other side of the computer screen, which is pretending to be a human being with a soul and capable of being creative and loving. I've got an Amazon bot that's actually so stupid it can't tell me an answer to a very simple question.
Yes, yeah. And I think, you've hit it on the head. Is that it's a very cold way of dealing with people, and you can feel it, when you're speaking to something that's not human.
Yeah,
Um, and this is the illusion, is a lot of people think that there's somebody typing an answer at the end of at the end of those things, and it's not. It's all AI. Yeah.
it's all AI. And the other one I'll do, because this brings the human aspect back in, is that I used to get very, very frustrated with call centers. You'd be there in the telephone queue waiting for an operative to talk to you, and inevitably the person talking to you was from some land far away. And very often I found I could find them difficult to understand. I mean, all credit to wherever they were living in the world. They worked at their English, but there were certain bits of it that I always found difficult. And so you had these rather unusual conversations. But eventually I decided that I was wrong in how I felt about these. So I made it a policy that anybody I spoke to from a call center, I would try to get them chatting. You
Mm.
might ask where they were. They're often very suspicious about that because
Yes.
they associate it with you're, you're hostile to them because they're in an overseas country. But I try an accent. I try and guess the accent. I try and get them to tell me where they are in the world, and then you can ask, is it sunny there? Because it's horrible here. I have a little game as to how long I can keep these people talking to me
Yeah.
about human things.
Yes.
And obviously, eventually, they've got to cut away because they've got the time pressure on each call. But invariably, I find I can have a few minutes conversation with them, and when I put the phone down, it's been human interaction and it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's important. It's really important. And I do it at supermarket checkouts because I won't go on the automated ones, the self checkouts. I always go on the human tills and always exchange some sort of, just a little conversation because these are human beings. They might be doing quite a robotic job, but they're human beings. And to just say, how are you today? And they respond, oh, someone's speaking to me. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
We just a few minutes ago you were talking more about, I'll use the term the beast that's slowly installing itself.
Hmm.
How do you see this monster that's coming in at the moment that seems to want complete and utter control over every one of us? How do you see it? What do you feel it is?
What do I feel it is? I feel, oh dear. Well, you see, there's a number of factors here, and there's a lot of different, how can I put it? There's a lot of different groups of people who are almost pushing for the same outcome. You've got the globalists and the people that want to rule the world, and they're the most pernicious, really, because they really want us to, they don't care about the collateral damage. It's just kind of business for them. It's a way of corporatizing the world, making loads of money, and to hell with everyone else. To hell with, they don't want to compete with 8 billion people on the planet for the resources. So they want us kind of, either in smart cities or gone or whatever. I don't know. It's difficult to know how deep that plan goes. We know that they I think they're failing. I think they're failing. And then of course you've got the people who are just in it for the finance as well. You've got the people like the impact investors who are there to purely sort of really make loads of money. But the Tony Blairs of this world, I know he's one of them, he's also a globalist, but anybody that works in impact investing, they don't actually see the damage they're doing because it's all data harvesting and data harvesting children in schools, this kind of stuff where the AI and the intelligence going into our schools at the moment is literally is all of that is being traded like futures, and they're trading on future outcomes of our children in schools and in their education. And so that, to me, is pernicious. It's horrible. And then of course you've got the futurists, the weird people like Elon Musk and Yuval Harari, who they're in it because they think they're gods, and they really think that it's our duty to almost exterminate ourselves, because we are. They feel that the only way to save the planet is to bring in all the cyborgs and everything, and that progress has to be made, whether it's, that this is progress and there's no getting away from it. And then, of course, you've got the military industrial complex, fomenting all the wars to make things worse. So, and it's all tied up together with the globalist plan. All of it is tied up. But the fact is that I think it's a dying beast at the moment. I think they're desperate at the moment. I mean, when I look at all the plans that have failed, they had the 8 Millennium Goals, which they had to ditch. And they created the 17 goals in 2015. And those failed. So then they decided to accelerate them in 2015 they decided to accelerate 17 goals, and then they decided to accelerate them again in 2019 because they'd failed, which is when they brought in, the pandemic, the lockdowns. And now they're panicking because they don't think things are going terribly well for them. And if you looked at any of the Davos, I don't know whether you looked at any of you must have done the Davos YouTube, some of the talks on the Davos meeting.
Yes,
Um,
we've seen quite a few of those, and they
I
are
mean,
incredible.
yeah, and some of them were, there was the Argentinian man, although I can't help but think that he was part of the plan. He was saying, this global communism isn't going to work. It didn't work in Argentina, and it's not going to work now. So stop it, sort of thing. Um, and I do, there's certain things like last week, Sweden threw out the 17 goals and the Sustainable Development Goals and 2030. So I think there's a breaking down, and people are. I think it's becoming more mainstream that we've got all the farmers coming out. So I think we've got a lot of pushback, and I think it's almost like when you get a dying dragon or beast or whatever, it flails around and causes a lot of damage. And that's what I'm feeling, that there's this dying beast. And of course, when it dies, it decays, and there'll be a bit of a stink, but we've got to sort of hold on to our humanness, and also have the fight to be able to resist this and say, we don't comply, we're not having any more of this. And whether people have got the strength to do that in England, I don't know. I hope so, because England should be the place where we oppose all this, or the UK.
What do I say to that? I I'd agree with your analysis of all the groups. There are many groups, and they're all interwoven and interlinked, and it's all made very. It's easy to see in a way because many of these organisations are hidden in plain sight, but then the links between them are not always in plain sight.
Mm,
But when you do your research, you can eventually, quite easily, I find, see the linkages between these organisations, and they've invariably got access to huge amounts of money, millions, billions of pounds. And so there seems to be some overarching control mechanism
mm,
to them, and they appear to be absolutely powerful. They've got all the money, they've got the military industrial complex, they got the military, they got the police. So it's very easy to say, oh my goodness, it's pointless to fight. But we are seeing that a relatively few people standing up and challenging or exposing them is causing them real problems. And I just mentioned James Roguski, who's been following the latest WHO treaty, which is trying to lock nation states into giving the WHO the power to make decisions over the countermeasures for future planetary pandemics. He's pointing out that the WHO now seems so unsettled that they are falling short of their own targets, and they're breaching their own guidelines.
mm.
So this is positive, isn't it? This is
It is
ordinary
positive.
men and women on the streets achieving something.
Absolutely. And it is funny that we've just seen, the whole exposure of what happened to the post office. That's taken 20 years to really to really go through the courts and be seen for what it is. And that documentary really pointed it out. But we've got all the vaccine stuff going on with Andrew Bridgen, pushing the inquiry in Parliament. And I think all of this is almost like a crescendo of stuff that they're having to deal with. And the truth is coming out. I mean, I have a daughter who works in the NHS, and she's finding that now people are definitely questioning what happened with the vaccine rollout. And so it'll take a long time to unpick all this stuff, and the financial devastation that's been created I don't know how that will unravel, because we've got so many councils going bankrupt, and we've got people not being able to pay their bills. So how do you, all the money has been spent on a lot of things that, the whole pandemic was an absolute disaster financially for the world. So I don't know how that all will unravel, if in an ideal world it was all seen to be a big farce, and a lie, an illusion, call it whatever you like. How long would it take for the world to recover from all of this and rebuild what it should be? I don't know.
Well, if we wanted it's not a perfect example, of course, but um, if you look at where countries have rebuilt war damage, probably we could go to Germany for the just amazing films of how Berlin and Dresden and other German cities were rebuilt from absolute rubble. And when people came together to apply themselves to do that rebuilding, and obviously they were equipped with what they needed, so they had all the tools and equipment, and
Mm,
it's and inevitably money also has to be supplied. But I watch some of these YouTube clips because I find them absolutely fascinating.
mm,
How utter destruction is, and I apologize for using this word because it's a bit off the New World Order, but destroyed cities are transformed
mm,
back into, a vibrant, bright working city. And
mm,
that's been done brick by brick, shovel, spadeful by spadeful, in order to change things. So I actually feel that we can be pretty optimistic about how we repair things. But before
yeah,
we can repair things, people need to know, the wider public, the wider population needs to understand they're being attacked. That's the bit that we are, to my mind, just starting to come to the beat. More people are beginning to understand there's something badly wrong.
mm. I mean, I think it almost needs a global Marshall Plan, doesn't it? So take the money for all these stupid wars that they've fomented in, sort of, Yemen and um, and Ukraine
Ukraine,
and
yeah,
Gaza,
Gaza,
and
yeah.
just stop all that, have a ceasefire. I mean, if I ruled the world, and you ruled the world, this is what would happen, and the money would go into reparations, and working out, proper ways of living and being, with a truly human understanding of what we all need. And we don't need wars like this. And the trouble is that these wars are, they're always they're always created by the same people, and we know that. And the fact is that for years, I mean, I don't know if you remember the Iron Mountain report. I've been looking at that because I'm looking at it as research for the book. Because in the Iron Mountain report, that was in the 1950s, I think, or between 50s and 60s, it was a report that was made that talked about the fact that we need perpetual war because it actually keeps the economy of the world going. And should that be taken away, what would the world look like? And unfortunately, the people that created the Iron Mountain report were the same people that are creating all the wars. So they then thought, well, what we'll have to do is create world government, and we'd get rid of war, but we'd actually have to control the entire population of the planet, which is why we are where we are now.
Yeah, and again, that hidden in plain sight because it had been written down, but it was only when people discover the documents and
Mm,
start to read them and understand them that we realize what's going on.
mm,
Sandy, it's been a fantastic discussion with you, really enjoyable. I have no doubt that through all your endeavors, all your hard work and your gutsiness, you've made a difference. And yeah,
thank
that
you.
difference is, it's all part of a domino effect that once we start to show a little bit, it grows. So I'm sure you've had an effect. What would you say to other women out there to get them to be bold enough to stand up and maybe do more than they are at the moment?
Um, well, maybe it's actually, talking to the men. Where are they? I mean, but present company accepted. But I think that there has been a lot of women, sort of standing up. And if you are a woman that really, sort of feels that it doesn't matter how small your endeavor, even if it's holding a meeting in your locality, even if it's a helping with a project, you might join your local PHA, health hub, or you might want to start a growing project or something locally, or you might want to hold a community meeting to get people together to challenge their councils. I mean, this is a really big thing. Councils have never been challenged like they're being challenged now. And I think that the talk that I did at the council last March that went viral nearly a year ago galvanized a lot of people who were thinking of doing something and going into their own councils, and they just did get up and do it. So just think of any way that you feel that you can affect change in your environment, and it doesn't matter how small that action is, it will make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And again, you were making me smile there because one of my other gutsy women guests told me off for being a bit mean to the men, but I stand my ground on this because I say I am not a big bloke, and I've had my head well above the parapet for a great many years now, and
Yeah.
I look around and I still feel that I should be pointing at the male population and saying, "Come on, blokes, where are you?"
Yeah.
But maybe maybe I'm being too tough on the men. We
No,
will see.
there's a lot of brilliant men, and there's a lot of men that have stood up and done a lot
Yeah,
of amazing things. It's not just us ladies. That was a bit of a joke, but there does seem
yeah,
to be a lot of women of a certain age who, like my age, who have done quite a bit. And maybe it's the whole maternal thing, the grandmotherly thing, whatever, is that you want to secure a really good future for your children, grandchildren, whatever, and future generations to come. And I think that is definitely something that drives women in this movement on, and men as well, I'm sure. But I think the maternal thing is so strong. Yeah.
yeah, brilliant. Well, Sandy, I think we've come to a
Thank you.
conclusion for our chat. It's been really wonderful to learn more about you and how you got involved, being active, speaking out, and making a difference. So I'm going to say a very big thank you for joining me this afternoon. It's been lovely.
Oh, thank you
And
so much, Brian. Thank you.
yeah, more power to your elbow. Keep going, keep
I'll
working
keep
on the
going. I'll
book.
never stop. Thank you.
All right, that's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.